On behalf of Nonviolent Peace Force, welcome to this exciting meeting. We'll start in about 2 minutes, but I want to encourage you to please put notes in the chat to say hello to each other. Maybe you see a familiar face or name. Nice to say where you're from so people can see. Yes, nice to see old friends in the chat too. Some for me there too. Very nice. Hello again, everyone, and welcome on behalf of the Nonviolent Peace Force. I think we have a good number of participants. I think we will start, and I will start by introducing myself. My name is Lucy Nusseibeh. I live in East Jerusalem and I work there, where I run a small nonviolence NGO. I also do a lot of work with GPPAC, the Global Partnership for Prevention of Armed Conflict. But I am here today because my most important work, of course, is with Nonviolent Peace Force, which I have the honor to be the chair of the board. So I'm really thrilled to be here moderating this Nonviolence Cafe. And the subject today is of extreme urgency and importance. Afghanistan, beyond militarism. What a tragedy and what an appalling situation. We all hope that we can learn lessons. We hope too that the military, who still talk about continuing and strategic aims that involve military, we hope that they will change their minds. We are lucky today to have 3 amazing speakers, all of whom come from Afghanistan and all of whom are women who, as you know, have borne the brunt and are bearing the brunt of the suffering, not just now under the Taliban, but over the years, decades of war that they've had to endure. So I would like to start now, introduce our 3 speakers. First, we have Safoora Arbab, who is an independent scholar and educator. Maybe, Safoora, could you, yes, you're there, you're lit up, okay. Maybe I thought you could put your hand up. It's nice for people to see you. Her work focuses on exploring the broad meanings of nonviolence. She obtained her doctoral degree from the Department of Comparative Literature at the University of California, Los Angeles, where she also taught classes on the literature of nonviolence. In alliance with the Meta Center for Nonviolence, which I imagine many of you are familiar with, she teaches courses on the alternate cosmologies of nonviolence and feminism. She is working on her book manuscript, The Ecstasy and Anarchy of Nonviolence, the intersectional resistance of the Khudai Khidmatgars in the northwest frontier of British India, that reads the Pashto literature of this popular nonviolent movement led by Abdul Ghaffar Khan, also known as Basha Khan, and the Frontier Gandhi. Her book focuses especially on the women poets that were active in this historically silenced movement. Furthermore, she has also published other articles on nonviolence, as well as Pashto poetry translations. She has her own website. For more information, at www.safoora'arbab.org with a capital A in the middle. Next, we will hear from Samaya Sarvardzadeh, who is an education practitioner and researcher. Maybe we could highlight Samaya. Thank you. Yes. Is an education practitioner and researcher, girls' education advocate, and a Fulbright scholar with an MA in International Education Administration and Policy Analysis from Stanford University. She has over 10 years of experience working with UNICEF, with the US Agency for International Development, USAID, and international nonprofit organizations. She has both theoretical knowledge and hands-on experience in designing, implementing, and evaluating interventions in early childhood education, community-based education, curriculum development, learning assessment, and teacher training in humanitarian and development contexts. Samaya's research centers around the intersection of education, peace, gender, and ethnicity in the conflict and post-conflict contexts. She explores the role of formal and informal education and social science curricula in improving gender equity and peace building. She recently moved to the US and lives in Arlington, Virginia. And our third speaker is Farishta Sakhi.
Hello.
Farishta?
Yes.
Is currently a PhD candidate at the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution at George Mason University. She has served as a senior diplomat and member of the leadership team at the Foreign Affairs Ministry of Afghanistan. She also served as Director General for Security Cooperation and Border Affairs. Farishta has expertise and has been part of several regional and international security dialogue and cooperation efforts, including Afghanistan affairs, transboundary water diplomacy, and border conflict resolution. Farishta has more than 18 years of frontline, broad-spectrum work experience with the Afghan government, the United Nations, USAID, INGOs, and local NGOs in the areas of post-conflict political transition, diplomacy, social development, democratization, good governance, civil society strengthening, and women's rights. Farishta has also been a lecturer at the American University of Afghanistan on peace and conflict resolution and has taught at the Institute of Diplomacy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Afghanistan. So I would like to ask each of you to share briefly about your work and then to help us with what the world can do to move beyond militarism, especially when it comes to Afghanistan. What would be helpful for the people of Afghanistan, particularly women and girls? Please, Safoora, you have 9 minutes.
Thank you very much, Lucy, for the introduction, and thank you to Gilda and the Nonviolence Peace Force for organizing this extremely important discussion. And especially, I am very honored to be here with Somaye and Farishta, who actually know the local conditions. And I'm just going to speak to that because there isn't enough time to talk about my own research, but I want to address the title of the talk, Militarism, Beyond Militarism, Nonviolence in Afghanistan, and to point to the fact that militarism is a logical consequence of this broader, very comprehensive framework of understanding. and this may seem very obvious to us in this nonviolent community, but I think we also, it is such a comprehensive framework that we also participate and uphold and reproduce it even through nonviolent interventions. And the whole term of intervention, I think, is a word that comes from this framework of understanding in which militarism has become such a norm in our lives. And Afghanistan itself reflects this militaristic understanding of the world, both in terms of its land and in terms of what is happening to its people right now. And it's not just the 40 years of wars that have been ongoing with the Soviet occupation, then the Civil War and the rise of the Taliban, and then of course the 20 years of the American occupation that remanufactured the Taliban because it served the military kind of framework of understanding. But even beyond that, I mean, the cliche almost of Afghanistan becoming the graveyard of empires stems from the British imperial sort of inscription of militarized borders upon that territory. And so Afghanistan is part of a three-layered border that the British imperial colonial government created in Afghanistan. Afghanistan was the first partitioning of and creation of a militarized border through the Durand Line. The second layer of that border was the tribal territories, and the third layer was called the Northwest Frontier Province. And even the cartographic name of that province suggests a militarized zone. And the name wasn't changed until just a few years ago by Pakistani government, which continued to create militarized garrison zones. And this whole framework of borders and inscriptions between a land and a peoples that are divided on either side of the border serves the militarized interests of that state as well. And so alongside with the militarization of these lands, particular representations of the people were created as lawless, barbaric people, as tribal people, as intrinsically violent peoples and a warrior race. And why I'm pointing to that representation is that we see that very clearly now in depictions of the Taliban. They are almost characterized representations of that colonial strain of representation. But what it does is it silences this whole representational framework, silences, as does the militarized borders, alternate representations and indigenous voices that are speaking about nonviolence already. In indigenous vernacular terms, these voices are not recognized, the histories are silenced. And that is where my work my research is on one of these silenced nonviolent movements called the Khuday Khidmatgar movement, started by Abdul Ghaffar Khan in 1929. And this was started as a social reformation of the people of the area, rather than an anti-colonial resistance movement. It led to that, of course, because their whole idea of social reformation in indigenous vernacular terms was an intrinsic threat to colonial domination. And it was even further a threat because this alliance started off as transcending the military borders. So Abdul Ghaffar Khan was in alliance with Haji of Turangzai in the tribal territories and with King Amanullah and Queen Suraya in Afghanistan. And this whole cross-border pan-Afghan alliances were centered on education and especially the emancipation of women and bringing them out into the public sphere. In fact, Afghanistan gave suffrage to women in 1919, a year prior to the US, and girls' schools were established on both sides of these, in all of these bordered areas, and women's education was central. So Khuday Khidmatgar movement had a very huge component of women participating in it. And I just want to point to, because I don't have too much further time, to the language that they used, and so that we can recognize that that language is being spoken even today, but is being ignored. So the indigenous language of nonviolence, for us as a nonviolence community, we need to shift our framework of understanding to the cosmology of nonviolence in order to be able to listen to the local voices that are already engaged with that. And I'm sure Somaye can speak to that much more cogently than I can. But just to point to the historical, the Khudai Khidmatgar's language, they situated themselves. So this was not just an import, a Gandhian import, the idea of nonviolence. It was actually rooted in the indigenous codes, the tribal codes of Pashtun Bali, and in Islam, in the framework of Islam. So especially the women, which might be surprising to most people, the women in the movement wrote their poetic resistance through the language of Islam by calling upon it as an enlightened form similar to the framework of nonviolence that granted women their right to be educated, to come out into the public sphere, to have rights, other rights, inheritance rights, divorce rights, so on. And they positioned that in opposition to local tribal culture, which was essentially a patriarchal kind of domination. This patriarchal domination very cogently was upheld by the colonial government. And so similar to the manufacture of Taliban and a regressive kind of forms of Islam, that is what is recognized through this framework that I'm calling a militaristic framework. And so even our understandings of Islam are based on those representational kinds of stereotypes. And so what I'm trying to say is that in order for nonviolence to become much more powerful and to empower people who are already engaged in it, we need to shift our framework of understanding in order to recognize that this language is already there in an indigenous forms. They know how to negotiate on the ground level with the Taliban. Even these kinds of occurrences were happening, but they were deemed associations with terrorists, and so were violently policed by the American forces. And there was drone attacks even in the tribal territories, often on peace negotiations. And so I am sort of going to end on that, is to speak to this shift in framework so we can recognize the language of nonviolence, even if it is spoken through a different kind of vocabulary than we are used to. And even the Taliban recognized that, because there was a very, and I'll end here, there was a very nice article just a few weeks ago in the New Yorker by Anand Gopal, in which he it was titled "The Other Afghan Woman," in which he asked a Taliban fighter, do you think that the suppression of women is in alignment with Islam, that they shouldn't be educated and be kept in their houses? And he does reluctantly reply that no, this is not in alliance with Islam, but with our village culture. And so the Taliban also need to be looked at in their context, and especially the context that they come from the rural areas. And the urban areas are the ones that have been more modern, more influenced through modern sort of Western kinds of notions of what women's emancipation looks like. And so that idea, I think, also needs to be critically analyzed through the framework, this alternate framework of nonviolence and the alternate understandings that nonviolence brings about with it. So I'll end there. I think my time is more than over.
It was fascinating. Thank you so much, Safoora. And yes, it's a good reminder that Islam actually was liberating for women when it started. People tend to either not know this or to forget about it. But I'm certainly going to look up your women poets. Thank you very much. Let's turn now to Samaya. 9 minutes, please, Samaya, if you can.
Thank you, Lucia, for the introduction, and Safoora for this enlightening start. So good morning, good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to be among this distinguished panel and audience at Nonviolence Cafe. With heavy and broken heart, I still think it's very important to voice my people, to resonate their needs and concern at this grave time, and to request the world not to forget Afghanistan. And I believe the Nonviolence Cafe is the right place to do so. This shift is really important, from militarism to nonviolence, and to believe that that's going to work. I'm going to start by asking a question. Do you think human beings are rational? As a girl, I was struggling to answer this question from a very young age, having 5 brothers and being the only girl, refugee girl. Every nuance in the way that I was treated made me ask why. Later, my curiosity traveled beyond my family and home, and I questioned people's choices, men and women, to understand why people make decisions and choices that do not seem logical to me, but still very solid for them. From 2009 to 2020, I lived and worked in Afghanistan. My focus of work was the intersection of education and gender. I was asking this kind of question: why a significant number of Afghan women are illiterate? Why girls are out of schools? Why are girls not allowed to continue their education to secondary and tertiary level? And why girls and women's rights is compromised first when a catastrophe hit Afghanistan or hit a community? And why regimes in Afghanistan tries to objectify women as soon as they start to get the power and take over Afghanistan? The same happening right now in Afghanistan, and you see women are the first who are removed from the public arena. So what helped me as a compass throughout my career and research was my answer to the early question that I raised. I believe that human beings are rational. Exceptions exist, of course, but and of course, being rational is a kind of a relative concept rather than absolute one. So I applied this lens and traveled across Afghanistan to learn the context that people live in and the way that they think, and then to find out how we could improve education indicators in Afghanistan. So right now I'm going to present you a set of another questions. I just checked the chat and I see people from different places in the world. So they can think about these questions and answer, maybe through the chat or just for themselves. So the question is, would you allow your girls or boys to go to a school if the closest school located 40, 50 kilometers away from your home and there is no paved road or there is no mean of communication for them? Would you allow your girls to go to school if there were no trained teachers there, if there is no textbook there, if the day before the schools have been bombed or a suicide bombing happened there? Would you allow your girls or boys to go? If your boys to be killed or to your daughters to be raped, would you allow your girls to go to schools? So these questions help me and not only me, a group of practitioners in Afghanistan to contribute and develop and implement a policy named community-based education. We went to the communities, learned about their context, and helped address their concerns. So we established schools as small as 1 classroom within the community in the rural and marginalized communities in Afghanistan. We trained local teachers. We provided learning material. We allowed them to kind of customize the curriculum if it's needed. We help them to establish councils so they can monitor, they can advocate for education. We were successful to some extent throughout the last 2 decades, but not ideal as we wanted. Still, even pre-Taliban, pre-August 15, almost 4 million children were out of schools. Where? In the areas that people couldn't trust the education system, in the areas that the drone attacks happened frequently, in the areas that people thought that the textbooks are written by their enemies, so they didn't want their children exposed to that curriculum. So we helped 500,000 children to get education annually, but it wasn't perfect. I learned a lot. We were progressing to change some of the dark realities in Afghanistan in the last 2 decades. Sometimes we just took 1 step forward, 2 steps backward. Sometimes it felt like a leapfrog. We helped one community and then they could continue their education, and then they went to the tertiary education. They became teachers, doctors, returned to their communities, and the whole face of the community changed. I was humbled how Afghan children overcame the challenges that they face, and I asked you, I helped you to understand their dilemmas about the difficulties that they had to go to schools, the dilemmas that they had when they had the textbook, they had the history textbooks, but this history textbook never recognized their sacrifices, their suffers that they had throughout the years. They poured their blood and sweats to change Afghanistan and break the vicious cycles of poverty, not only poverty, but many kind of assumptions and that they had throughout this year. And now I'm very saddened to witness again how militarism and proxy wars in Afghanistan is about to ruin what people of Afghanistan achieved in the recent years. Yeah, we are hopeful that Afghans are going to rise again, but what we can do. I think the world has the means to put pressure on Taliban. First of all, what Safoora mentioned earlier, we need to switch from this militarism framework and think about that people are wise, people are rational. We need to help them to do for themselves what they need. They're able to negotiate for them. Yes, we have some means to pressure, we have some leverages to help them, but again, drone attack is not the way out. Militarism is not the way to help people in Afghanistan, or probably nowhere. So before I end, I would like to share a story, and then according to that, ask you to do some active advocating for Afghanistan. I know a girl, her name is Fatima. Fatima born in 2003, so she didn't experience Taliban back in 1996 to 2001. She was born to a traditional Afghan family where her mother and her grandmothers never had access to education. Her two elder sisters got married at the age of 20, and only they completed the secondary education. But Fatima, born after 2001, born to a community in urban areas, and she was from very early age, she wanted to completed her tertiary education, become a doctor, serve her community. Only this year, 2021, she passed the entrance exam of university, and she got one of the top scores in Herat, where I am originally come from. She was counting down the days to start university and go to university, but now is very difficult time for her. Her last year's effort and what she has done to achieve all seems meaningless. And there are many Fatimas in rural areas of Afghanistan, in urban areas of Afghanistan, and you cannot imagine how we feel. I, as educators and advocate, where we feel that we helped and encouraged children and girls to go to schools, fight back, and continue their education, but now we don't know how to help them. These days, one of the hot topics everywhere is whether Taliban regime should be recognized by the international community or not. And you are coming from different places in the world. So what I want you to do is to first answer these questions. What you want from your government? Do you want your government to recognize the government of Taliban? And if you want, under which conditions? Please, we need to use our leverages. It doesn't mean to use militarism. It doesn't mean to think that the people of Afghanistan doesn't know how to do that. They are right now doing that. The movement that women in Herat, in Kabul, in Kandahar started, it shows that people know how to protect their rights and demand for their rights. But what the rest of the world can do to help them? Please start campaigns, even virtual campaigns, to put some conditions so we can collectively pressurize Taliban to.
Thank you. I think it's good like that, to collectively pressurize the Taliban. And thank you for your wonderful work. The community-based education, it's really inspiring. Thank you. Thank you for a lovely speech. Now, Farishta, please, 9 minutes. And may I just remind the participants to put questions in the chat. If there's anything you would like to ask, please put your questions in the chat. Farishta?
Yeah, do you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you from Nonviolent Peace Force for organizing this virtual talks. I think this is happening in a very critical moment where Afghans all over the world, not only Afghans, but Afghans, the friends of Afghans, and women all around the world are in a state of shock. I think a couple of months ago, we were not believing that we would come and talk about reversal, going back 20 years earlier. Unfortunately, we are in a situation where again, we are talking about Taliban, we are talking about the repressive regime, we are talking about going back and moving back 20 years ago in terms of our achievements, in terms of all the gains we struggled for during these last 20 years in terms of peace, in terms of development, in terms of human rights, women's rights. Unfortunately, all those gains are at a level of stake. We are all sitting and watching, and we are witnessing that every day as the situation unfolds, unfortunately, the situation is turning against us, against those people who are pro-peace and pro-development. So I will take the audience. Thank you very much for your participation. I'll take you through the account of last 1 month, what has happened. Unfortunately, it was a surprising shock the way Taliban took over Afghanistan. It happened in a jiffy, it happened very quickly, and it really took all people in a complete state of shock. People felt betrayal by the international community, by their own president who left, without really preparing people, without really informing people, without preparing people for this massive change. So this state of collapse came up with a lot of anxiety. I think the world has witnessed the Kabul airport, how people were rushing to save their lives and to save the lives of their beloved ones and get into the planes for evacuation. The same scenario was in the borders with on Iran, across the Iran and Pakistan borders, where influx of thousands of refugees were trying to move towards Pakistan, and Afghans were trying to move towards Pakistan and Iran to save their lives. Unfortunately, many of them lost their lives. We have seen the the unfortunate event at the Kabul airport where more than 200 people lost their lives in the suicide attacks, and the drone attack, which was followed by that. So this chaotic scene was followed by Taliban coming and telling people to maintain some level of peace and to expect a different kind of government from Taliban, and especially telling that we have amnesty for all, so everybody is safe under their government structure. Unfortunately, this was followed by a series of extrajudicial executions, by searching their house, by trying to finding the people who were working with Afghan National Defense and Security Forces. So people lost a lot of their hope in terms of the notion of amnesty, which was introduced by Taliban. The other thing was the cabinet. Their cabinet, unfortunately, was completely not inclusive. They did not include people from other political parties, from previous government, not a single person from women. And some of the people on the cabinet list were extremely shocking because they were involved in the massacre of people during the last 20 years. In terms of women's rights, they imposed a of course, before this collapse of regime, there was, during the peace process, which started 2 years ago by a special representative of the United States, Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad, the narrative was that they are the new Taliban. They are the moderate Taliban. They have changed, and they are going, the kind of government which they are going to bring is going to be inclusive, and it's also going to involve women. Unfortunately, the new kind of government they proposed was again based on the strict notion of Islam, which is coming mainly from the Salafi verdicts or Salafi values. And for them, again, women have rights according to the Sharia law, but we know that Taliban interpretation of Sharia law is very strict. So the first thing that they did was segregation of, in terms of education. They allowed only girls to attend school until grade 8, and beyond that, so far we are waiting. They said we are preparing because we are sensitizing our foot soldiers. We are not ready yet, and we have to have time. But we are closely following that case, and it has been almost 2 weeks. No changes have, no improvement, no development has happened. The other thing is in terms of girls or women higher education. Unfortunately, there is still segregation. Women and men, or girls and boys, are kept separate. So segregation rule is going to be imposed. Employment, so far, my all family members, sisters, cousins, nobody is daring to go to the work. Even some of the people who approached for the work, they were asked to stay at their home and wait till the next sign. The other issue is the shutting down of Ministry of Women's Affairs, shutting down of all Department of Women's Affairs. Unfortunately, this was really unacceptable for all women. And therefore women had a lot of campaigns and a lot of demonstrations, and most of these demonstrations, both in Kabul, in Herat and other provinces, were shut down by force. And some of the people in Herat also lost their lives. In terms of dress code, Taliban again started preaching for very strict dress code, head to black attire, which again had a strong backlash from other women who started having a campaign on "Do not touch my dress," and they showed that this is not the real identity of Afghans. This is the real identity of Afghans, or the dressing is different. It's not the one presented by Taliban. The other issue is which is very much critical at this stage, is the humanitarian crisis. A lot of people have lost their jobs, especially women. They are not going to school. The women-headed families, the widows, the women working in the community level, they all have lost their jobs. They're sitting at home, waiting for some kind of assistance. Unfortunately, the situation on all the funding, which the central bank reserves, which was put on hold, I think that situation is creating a lot of hectic inside the people. People do not have access to their cash. So it's not only about the rights and liberties, but it's also about the next meal on the table, which many people are missing. And it's also about the basic health facilities, which many clinics and hospitals at this stage are missing. So humanitarian situation, UN has warned that if the situation continue to remain the same, by next year, Afghans will have more than 90% of people living under poverty line, which is very dire at this situation. So some of the major recommendations, first of all, because of the time limit, I think the very first thing is we have to make sure that those people who are at risk, women who have worked with the international organizations, women who were very active with departments of women's affairs, prosecutors, journalists, civil society leaders, and those who worked at the community level, who feel in danger, these lives needs to be saved. Unfortunately, the evacuation happened in a very sloppy manner. People who deserved to be rescued were not rescued. So the international community and the friends of Afghanistan should ensure that these lives are not in danger and they are saved in a very immediate term. The second issue is issue of internally displaced people. A lot of people have been internally displaced, and many of these household families, which are led by women, I think they need the first or imminent support in terms of food and in terms of clothing, in terms of shelter. We have noticed that around the world, women have come forward and they have protested and they have showed their support for the Afghan women. I think this is the very right time for everyone. As my friend Samaya said, we have to mobilize people around the globe. We have to mobilize women around the globe to come and show their solidarity and to put pressure on their governments to ensure that women's rights are not compromised at this level, especially their right to education and employment and seeking health services. These are very, very critical at this stage. And we cannot, it's just the matter of urgency. And humanitarian crisis, which is going to be very much affecting on all people on Afghanistan. I think we have to push our governments to ensure that the funding is going to Afghanistan. And when these fundings are going to through Taliban, Taliban should be put under pressure and conditions to ensure that women are included in all decision-making, especially in terms of allocation of resources and in terms of distribution of services to the people in need. And I'll stop here and I'm open for the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for those very clear and concrete recommendations. I hope everyone has made a note of them. And it's terrifying to think of 90% under the poverty line and of no one daring to go to work. Such a tragic picture. Thank you all very, very much for your presentations. We have time for a few questions, which I'm pulling out of the chat. So the first one, is the internet access restricted, or could that be used to drive virtual education for girls for the time being, for the interim? I don't know. Would you like to try that? Thank you.
Yes, sure. Again, our understanding from Afghanistan seems very limited. We are talking about urban areas and majority rural areas in Afghanistan. Infrastructure-wise, we had only electricity and power limited to the few urban areas, and internet access also is limited to our urban areas, though that we have access to mobile phone, but digital literacy is, the divide is really commonplace in Afghanistan. And having having internet, having iPad or laptop is a luxury rather than a case that everyone have access. So yeah, that might help a few, maybe thousands of students in Kabul, in Herat, in Kandahar, in Mazar, but we are talking about almost 6 million girls, and around 3 million of them were in secondary education, and we are talking about 1 million or almost 1 million students in the university. So and we know the limitations of internet-based education. It's not going to be practical for all the majors. I would stop here.
Oh, thank you. Is there a way to deal with this digital divide? If people can be trained with telephones, with mobile phones, wouldn't that be possible?
There are
some huge number that you've talked about. But
there were some interventions before to help, but again, if Farishta, maybe you can help me regarding the literacy rate in Afghanistan. We are talking about almost 70% of Afghan women are illiterate, and maybe around 50 to 60 men, population of men doesn't have. So to overcome the digital divide, we need to first help the community and population to become literate at their language, and then English, and then technology. So and again, people are rational. If you cannot get an employment out of an education, so do you still think it's a right investment? I doubt it. I doubt it that, girls, of course they are passionate about education, but how we can encourage them to continue education, that there is no hope after that. They still need to remain at the home limitation. So it's kind of very complex. We can think about it, but there are other aspects that we need to consider.
Thank you for the clarification. Okay, here's another question for any of you, I think. Are there channels where we can provide direct support to local women who are resisting, as well as creating alternatives?
Yes, can I speak?
Yes, please.
So I think I'm currently with a group of Afghan women from around the world, and also who are working in Afghanistan, who are the leaders of NGOs and who are working with community organizations. So there are a lot of women still very active on the ground, not only in Kabul, but also in the provinces with their organizations, though they are not actively going to these organizations. But for example, the organization which I and my sister co-founded a couple of years, like 20 years back in Herat, it's still functioning, but women cannot go to these organizations. So there are channels of supporting people, and briefly, these can be NGOs and local organizations, or individuals who have more trust and who have worked in the communities. We can provide that list if they want.
Thank you. I was just going to ask if you could provide something for the participants. Sure. In this via the Nonviolent Peace Force. We'd be really grateful. I'm sure there are many people here who would be very, very happy to help. I think we have time for one last question, which is for Safoora. Could the Khudai Khidmatgar be reactivated as an Islamic Pashtun nonviolent movement to secure rights today?
There already exists actually a nonviolent Pashtun movement that is situated in the tribal territories. It's called the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement. And they have a lot of women participating in that. There's also a women's Jarga movement called the Khwendo Jarga, Sisters Jarga. And I'm sure Somaye knows more about what the local nonviolent movements in Afghanistan are that are already existing. But the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement takes their inspiration from Bacha Khan and the Khudai Khatmatgar movement. But again, and it's a huge movement across the borders. They've even been accused by the Pakistani militarized state that they're getting the funding and support from Afghanistan, and so they're a threat to the Pakistani military establishment. But they have criticized both the Taliban extremism and the Pakistani militarization, as well as US occupation and drone attacks that are been happening over there. And so these cross-border groups already exist, and that's what needs to, I think, once we do shift our framework and understand that the language of nonviolence already exists in the areas, is to empower those groups more, because they will also be able to communicate with the Taliban, who are also speaking that language, whether it's sincere or not sincere, but they are speaking the language of let's bring about peace, and they are very much committed to the idea of justice. So if that language can be utilized, that what they are doing is unjust through the vocabulary of nonviolence and Islam, I think there is an avenue for dialogue and negotiation there, rather than just relying on force or sanctions or foreign government pressure from outside. I think that, of course, is necessary because of the existential danger that exists at the moment. But I think that's not just the solution. I think the solution is to recognize indigenous groups that are already working there and to reach out to them.
Thank you. Do you have particular steps that could be encouraged to empower these groups, or to help them, their message reach more widely?
Absolutely. I think for us, we need to first shift our framework. That's why I keep emphasizing that we are not recognizing that they exist. And once we do, then we can communicate with them, even if that language is different. And I can certainly sort of point to the groups that I know of, and then maybe Somaye and Farishta can add to that list of people working in Afghanistan and who would be good to reach out to. Yeah, that's all I can suggest at the moment. But if I think of something else, I will. Yeah.
Thank you all so much. That's been really an amazing set of presentations, and and out of such painful circumstances, you have been so articulate about what needs doing, as well as what you're going through. I want to point out to you that there's a resource list for NP supporters that will be shared through the chat box, and they will also be emailed to anyone who registered to participate in this Nonviolence Cafe. And now I would like to give does one give the floor or the screen? Anyway, whichever, to my colleague Deepa Sureka from the board of the Nonviolent Peace Force. Welcome, Deepa.
Thank you, Lucy. Safoora, Samaya, and Farishta, thank you for this really thought-provoking conversation. You ladies are a tough one to follow, but I'll do my best. Lucy, thanks for allowing me to share my Nonviolent Peace Force story with all. So hi, everyone. I'm Deepa Sureka. I'm an entrepreneur and operator, a mother, and a proud NP board member. So my journey brought me from Bombay to New York in the early 2000s. And like most immigrants, I was driven in a mad rush to live and build my American life. So I learned quickly the best way to do that was keep my head down, focus on what I do best, which is work hard, fast, smart. So I grew my career and started living this beautiful American dream. And then I had my kids. And it is in those moments, I think we start thinking of the world not just as it is, but as you want to see it. I learned of Nonviolent Peace Force through a Women for Good forum on Facebook. And coming from the land of Gandhi, the name itself intrigued me. One thing led to another, and I had the opportunity to meet Gilda, Tiffany, and Tiff in probably one of the most surreal evenings. I was surrounded by these folks who live through the eyes and experiences of people who've been in war-torn regions like Iraq, South Sudan, Myanmar. Their stories of protecting communities, saving lives just with their presence, and staying at task even when a bomb had landed not too far from their location, it gave me goosebumps. On my car ride home, all I kept thinking was, is this real? How does it work? Why don't more people know about Nonviolent Peace Force? And importantly, how can I be a part of this? So now as a proud board member, I can tell you they are for real. And my favorite thing is to receive these amazing stories from the field, the gratitude shared by communities towards NP staff for training them in conflict resolution, safely escorting someone across the border, or protecting a young girl from harm's way. The impact of their work is absolutely awe-inspiring. I think we'd all agree that 2020 was a year of reckoning and awakening in many ways. As the virus brought our communities to a standstill, the murder of George Floyd appalled us of who we've become. In the United States, we now have more guns than people. We're now a nation living in fear, and as a parent, this is not the world I want my kids to be in. So I am grateful for Nonviolent Peace Force that they can leverage their experience to bring peace and help us drive practices that build trust within our communities and our youth. So my ask is simple. I hope you can support Nonviolent Peace Force in many ways. You can educate your friends and family about their work. You can ask your employer to add Nonviolent Peace Force to their donor match program. You can donate to them once, you can donate to them monthly. Anything and all you do will help spread this movement for peace. So thank you for listening, and thank you for supporting Nonviolent Peace Force.
Thank you, Deepa. I hope everyone had those important words of encouragement. I would really like just to thank everyone again, especially our amazing and inspiring panelists. I think you bring hope for the future of Afghanistan. The three of you really, you make us think with people like you that a lot can be achieved. And we would love to help you in doing it. So thank you very, very much. And now what I'd like to do is, well, first of all, we have an experiment actually, that there's something called a Mentimeter. Now you hear me getting less confident about this. A Mentimeter will appear in the chat box where you can share your feelings and your reactions to this cafe, which Christina has now put the link for this. So you click on the link and then you can put whatever you feel like saying. But the other thing that will happen, which is perhaps more easy and friendly for us, is that you will be unmuted in just a minute or two. And so you can say hello, goodbye, thank you, whatever you feel like sharing with the other participants. But again, on behalf of Nonviolent Peace Force, thank you all very much. Thank you, Gilda, for bringing us together. And thanks to all the team at NP who've worked behind the scenes for this, and to Tiffany, who worked so hard. Everyone, thank you. And look forward to seeing you again at our next cafe. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everybody, thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much. It was wonderful.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
And good luck to the good people in Afghanistan. My heart goes out to you. We're helping to resettle people in the Massachusetts area now, those who did get out. But we need to do much more for those in Afghanistan. And we will try.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's support the indigenous nonviolent movements that you have. I hope we can do that in so many ways.
Yes.
You women are awesome. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, I'd like to learn so much more about that movement. That's something new. Thanks for sharing.
Thanks, you all. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. My heart is with you, and I will work to support you all.
Thanks to everyone for your presentations and for everything that the Nonviolent Peace Force is doing. It is.
Thank you, David. And Jan.
With love to all of you and to the people of Afghanistan. Tashakkur.
تشکر از شما.
Hi. Thank you so much.
Mohabbat.
I strongly agree with the idea of reframing what people think about the Afghan people, instead of most of them being warriors, that most of them want the same things that we do. Safety for their families, enough to eat, education. That's going to make a big difference, I think.
How do you pronounce the Khadai Khidmatgar?
It's with a ch sound, as though you're kind of hearing.
Yeah, I know that from, I'm half Jewish, so I know that. So how do
Khodai
you say?
Khidmatgar. Khodai Khidmatgar.
Khadai Khidmatgar.
Or the servants of God in translation. That's what they're called. That's what it translates into, servants of God.
Well, I'm not religious, but I could deal with it, I guess. I don't believe anybody's in control, but all of us collectively.
That's the translation of the Khodai Khidmatgar.
Right.
Thank you so much. It was just wonderful and to learn. And I love the piece about lifting up what's already existing, the movement that's already existing. So thank you for all of it. It was very meaningful, heart touching, and I'm so impressed with what is being done.